So we don't have to, I don't have to remember to record. So
Excellent.
yeah, at last I'm remembering after what, about 2 or 3 years. Let's see, I'll start off with some history, which will put some other things in context. I'll start off with an anecdote from 1979 when I was first being employed at Atari. And I remember one day driving into the parking lot and getting out, walking to the Atari engineering building and bumping into Dennis Coble, who was the supervisor of the VCS games. And we were chatting on the way in, and we continued chatting as we walked through the engineering building about fantasizing about the day when video games would be art. And in many ways, our tone was facetious. Yes, we'll do something to rival Beethoven's Fifth Symphony. But there was an underlying sense that there really was something there, that this really was plausible in the far future. And that idea stuck with me throughout my career, and I continued making small steps towards it through the 90s. And then through the 80s. And then in the early 90s, I said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I then began a 30-year experiment trying to get interactive storytelling working. And I did all sorts of great stuff. I'm extremely proud of the technology I produced. In particular, the Sappho scripting language that I designed for the technology, because as a programming language, it's quite unconventional, and it really helps integrate the use of mathematics into the programming process. Right now, programming languages, yeah, sure, you know, we've got sines, we got cosines, we got hyperbolic functions, we got all sorts of mathematical functions. You can do any math you want, but there's nothing to help you do the math. That is, we got tons of debugging tools and program performance tools. We got all sorts of ways to help you, but you're on your own when it comes to the math. And I've long felt that the math is crucial. And so I developed some really neat tools or accessories to the system that really made it a lot easier to use math and assess exactly what it was doing in the system. And there were a lot of other neat things about it. The use of color coding for data types, and there were a lot of neat ideas, and nobody's ever copied them, I'm sad to say. But ultimately it failed. I spent 30 years working on this interactive storytelling system based on a language system that I call Dicto. And again, the language system I designed was I'm very proud of, a really neat way of encoding language that actually works inside a computer. But ultimately, again, I failed to get anything that really worked. My last big gasp with this was a project I called Seaboot. And I decided I was really going to commit to this. I recruited people to help me with the art and so forth. And boy, we really put a lot of work into Seaboot. And I realized after 4 years that it wasn't going to work, that it was boring. It just didn't have the dramatic impact I wanted. And so with much regret, I killed the project, and I felt extremely guilty because I brought these people in and then I'd let them down. And so my first reaction was, okay, I'm just not going to do anything for a while. That didn't actually last very long because I already had one more idea. And that idea was that I had to do an Arthurian game. For me, the introduction to Arthuriana was the movie Excalibur in 1981, I think. One of the finest movies ever made. Its budget, it had a fairly low budget. The budget wasn't adequate for the ideas of the director, but they still did magnificent stuff, beautifully written. There's so many great quotes in that movie. For it is the doom of men that they forget. Or when a man lies, he murders a part of the world. Merlin had all the great quotes. Anyway, that got me started, and I did an Arthurian game while at Atari, and it had a lot of neat stuff in it, some good innovations, but it came out just before Atari collapsed, so not many people saw it. Anyway, let's see. And then I told myself, someday I got to do it right. But as the years went by, I never had the opportunity. But I made a big, when I started on interactive storytelling, I said, I'll do my Arthurian game now. And I made an attempt at it and came up with something pretty good. But at the time, the only way to publish a game was through publishers. And I couldn't get any publishers interested in it. And so that project just kind of died. And I did all sorts of other stuff. And actually, I came back to the Arthurian game about 15 years ago. I made a third try. And that was better, but still not good enough. And so after Seaboot failed, I said, all right, look, I'm getting old here. I've got to do the Arthurian game. And here's Nas. So I've got to do the Arthurian game. And so I began working on this. Hi, Nas.
Hey, yo, sorry for joining late.
Okay, no problem. Do you see the two files in the chat box?
Nope.
They don't show up for you?
No.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll put up the one of them in a few minutes because it'll fold right into what I'm talking about. I'm describing the evolution and development of the Morte D'Arthur story world. So anyway, so I began working on the Morte D'Arthur, and I started off with a pretty clear idea, but then it started changing. And in fact, now's the time for me to re-upload this image. Do you remember those images of human evolution showing the monkey and then the gorilla and then the human? Well, this is my graphical metaphor for the evolution of Le Morte D'Arthur. And it demonstrates the fact that the design kept zigging and zagging in different directions. I started off with one vision for the design, and then, oh no, I throw that away and move in that. And then, oh no, zag over here. And it just went round and round, all through all sorts of changes. And as a result, I was reluctant to talk about it publicly. I felt I needed to keep it secret because anything I told people today might be totally obsolete tomorrow. So throughout the 3 years of development of this, I've been very quiet about Le Morte D'Arthur. I really haven't said very much. So now is the first time I'm really talking about it. The main thing, though, I want to say about Le Morte D'Arthur, it's actually in pretty good shape right now. We're still filling in the artwork, but in terms of operations, if I died tomorrow, it wouldn't be a big problem for me. I'm satisfied with Le Morte D'Arthur the way it is right now. There are a lot of improvements I could make, and I'm working on it. But it already has accomplished my primary goal, in that this thing is art with a capital A. I want to say that I've always been a very harsh critic of my own work as well as others. And up to this point, I have never seen anything in the universe of software that I would consider to be genuine interactive art. There is a lot of art out there, but it's not interactive. That is beautiful movies done on the computer, which is fine as movies, but it's not interactive. And lots and lots of good art, but not genuinely interactive art. And I have never succeeded in doing that until now, because this thing really is art. I am very proud of that. I feel that I've finally, after 30 years of failure, finally accomplished my life goal. This Le Morte D'Arthur is about the meaning of life and its relationship to death. I'm not kidding when I say the title is Le Morte D'Arthur. It is about death in many ways. And I'm very proud of that. I'm satisfied that I finally accomplished that. Now, the architecture of the system actually looks rather simple. It's just a linear story world with some trees every now and then. So most of it is fairly linear. There are 370 encounters in the system as a whole. Of those, maybe 100, a bit less than that perhaps, are linear encounters. That is, you just see it and it doesn't matter what you don't branch away from that. You can make decisions, but they don't lead to branching results. That's a major difference from a lot of other things, because most people think that if you have that if you make a decision, it should result in a branching. It doesn't. It doesn't necessarily lead to a branching in Le Morte D'Arthur. It still affects the outcome. But what's happening is you're changing global variables when you make a decision. Now, again, some of these encounters, you get only one button. Yeah, I mean, you read the text and you've got some buttons, 1, 2, or 3 buttons. And the 3 buttons, and sometimes it's only one, which means you don't get a choice. You read the encounter, you see what happens, and you say, oh, okay, click. And that's all that happens. But there are others with 2 buttons and others with 3. But when there are more than one button, then whatever choice you make will affect the outcome. So that's an absolute. It's just that it will affect it in ways you may not understand at first. Let's see, technically, the thing is a puzzle. By my definitions, it is a puzzle in that you have to get it. You have to learn the artistic message. But it's very different from the puzzles in games. That is, in games, most of the puzzles in games are what I call one-step puzzles. You come to a door and the puzzle is, you've got to know that this door requires the purple key. And you put that key in and the door opens. It's just a one-to-one relationship between the puzzle and the solution. And more important, the solution to the puzzle is a matter of data, not process. That is, you don't have to understand any laws of physics or chemistry or dramatic principles. You just have to know that this door needs the purple key. Or perhaps in a shooter, you have to know on level 27, when the door opens, you got to duck and jerk over to the right because there's a fireball coming in from the left when the door opens. And again, that's data, that's a fact. And you have to memorize the fact. There is no way you can predict that. There's no principle of fireballs always come in from one direction or the other when the door opens. So most of the puzzles are learned only by direct experience, and you can't apply your understanding of the universe to solve any of them. That is not the case with Morte D'Arthur. It is one puzzle, but it extends over the entire system, over the 370 encounters, and each encounter contributes just a little bit to the puzzle. And it's not that it's not like a jigsaw puzzle where you have to, each encounter puts in one piece of the puzzle. It's more that the encounters add up, literally add up. That is, there's an arithmetic relationship between the effects of your decisions. And if you make enough good decisions, then you reach a satisfying conclusion. You don't win or lose. If you make a lot of bad decisions or too many bad decisions, then you will reach an unsatisfying conclusion. So it is, yes, it's a puzzle technically, but it is a puzzle unlike the kinds of puzzles we see in games. In fact, most people won't recognize it as a puzzle, but technically that's what it is. And again, the basis of the puzzle are some principles about our artistic principles about the meaning of life. And if you come to understand those principles, you will reach and apply them, you'll reach a satisfying conclusion. So you don't have to go through 5 times and, yeah, in this encounter, I got to do that. It's much more a matter of applying your intuition. And the decisions you make are always subtle and tricky. It's not as if you get a decision, gee, Arthur, we just got a whole lot of orphans showing up in Camelot. What should we do with them? And your choices are, let's build an orphanage for them, or, hell, kill them all. It's not that simple. All of the buttons you face, every one of them, well, there's one where it's pretty obvious, but in most cases, these are difficult philosophical or personal or aesthetic or ethical decisions. And it's never a matter of I'll be a good guy or I'll be a bad guy. It's, what's best for the community. It's complicated, it's subtle, and that's the whole point. So as part of this, though, I'm going to tell you right now, I will give you no spoilers. I will never release any spoilers. That is, a spoiler would be something like, okay, when you're playing this game, remember, in level 27, when the door opens, duck and jump to the right because there's a fireball coming in from the left. That's a spoiler. And that's good with a lot of these games where the critical actions are arbitrary and capricious. There's no way you can know in advance. And so it's helpful for somebody to give you one of these spoilers. But this is not that kind of situation. Here, the decisions to make are ultimately decisions you should already know, or you will learn the underlying principles of. But again, they're not easy. Here's an example. We don't like spoilers for murder mysteries. You're watching this movie and who killed Duke Smith? And what's fun about murder mysteries is that you form a series of hypotheses. You start off, I bet the butler did it. Yeah, he did it because he was mad because. And then a little later, no, it couldn't have been the butler. Okay, must have been the chambermaid. Yeah, she was mad because, oh no, the chambermaid was having sex with her boyfriend at the time of the no. So, and you keep forming hypotheses and getting them thrown out. And finally, normally, if you're good, you figure it out just before the end. And the guy says, ha, it was the mailman. And you say, yes, I knew it was the mailman. That's what makes it entertaining. And if somebody comes to you before you watch the movie and says, oh, well, it was the mailman, that's a spoiler. It ruins it for people. I won't do that to you, and I'm asking that you not do that to anybody else. By all means, tell them your personal impressions. It's frustrating, it's confusing, it's difficult, I don't understand. The writing sucks, the artwork stinks, whatever, personal evaluations. Just don't give people any spoilers, because that really will ruin the experience. The artistic content, the substance of Morte D'Arthur is in the interaction. The way people get the message, the way it ends up punching them in the stomach is through the decisions they make. And then they come to their final result and they say, oh, geez, I did it wrong. And maybe they try again and get it right the next time. So anyway, I'm taking too long here. The primary thing we're waiting on now is the artwork. I did a lot of the artwork, or some of it, a little of the artwork myself. Mostly by what I'll call Tinker Toy graphics. I go all over the internet. Oh, look, I'll take this. And oh, there's a nice sky. I'll take that for the sky. And there's the horse I need. And then I sort of put everything together. And I get kind of close that way. But actually, my greatest success has been in stealing classic art. Michelangelo is not under copyright any longer. And and some of the classical artwork is really very good. Oh yes, the Guinevere. I also, one thing I did to help fund it all was I went on Patreon and I asked people, if you can contribute $100 to this, you get to be the model for one of the major characters. And in fact, Craig Maloney here, he made a contribution and he became Gawain. And in fact, I'm going to put that back up again, just so you can see. We got a great artist. She is so good. And here's Gawain. So there you go. If you look at that, you can see that the artist really did capture Craig's face. That really is Craig. It's just he's got a mustache and a beard. She did a great job. So anyway, she's done some good stuff. And I did another trick here that for some reason throughout my life, I have formed a number of intimate platonic relationships with 3 women, all of whom have died. And so I wanted to immortalize them. And so one of the women is Mabon, sort of the chambermaid or servant. Another is Rianu, the medicine woman. And the third is Guinevere. And again, the artist did a great job taking the photographs and turning them into characters. So anyway, no, Laura did not die. So she doesn't count. If she does, then I'll put her in. I'll also mention that one of the women named Gemma, who becomes Guinevere, she had a dog named Kutana that she named Kutana. That's an Irish word for basically dog. And she really loved that dog, and it died. And so Kutana is in the Morte D'Arthur, and he shows up visibly. So anyway, let's move on here. I'm running out of time. But we have to pause for a moment while I this. Okay. Now, I have actually been to a number of Arthurian places in England, most especially Cadbury Castle, which is generally held to be the site of what was later called Camelot. It wasn't the castle and any, all of the stuff most people think of about Arthur is just wrong. The real Arthur was not at all like the legends, but there probably was somebody who was later called Arthur, and we know a lot about that situation. And one of the important places, there's Cadbury Castle, which is really just a hilltop. And then there is also Glastonbury and the Glastonbury Tor, which is a hill that sticks up out of the middle of nowhere. It's very striking. The area originally was just a gigantic marshy area with this hill sticking up right out of the middle of it. Quite high, quite striking. Anyway, I've been there a number of times, and 30 years ago, when I was there, I bought this. This is from a spring right at the base. This is Glastonbury Tor, imaged here. And this is from a spring right at the base of the Tor called Arthur's Spring. And so I bought this spring water 30 years ago. And I told myself, I'm not going to drink this until I publish my Arthurian gang. Well, I published it. Let's clear it out a little more. I published it, and so it's time to finally drink this 30-year-old water, which is probably full of plasticines and esters and all sorts of other nasty things. So I'm only going to take a sip.
It's going to taste bad, yeah.
Yeah. So here we go. If I die, tell people why. So. Ta-da!
30 years.
Yep. Actually,
30 years.
It tastes okay. So
Awesome.
anyway,
How did it taste?
pardon?
Was it bitter?
No, I'm surprised it didn't taste like it had much plasticine in it. Although that's
Awesome.
because I opened the bottle last night and I spent a lot of time blowing air through it, which really will pull out most of the volatiles. So
Interesting. Yeah, I tasted on a hike maybe 3-year-old or 2-year-old water, and it was so bad that I eventually, after drinking enough of it, I'm like realizing I'm poisoning myself. I pour it out,
yeah,
refilled it. But yeah, nice.
You don't drink water that's been stored in these plastics for a long time, unless you air it out, and you have to let it breathe like fine wine. So,
Well, maybe I'll bottle some water in a holy mountain and make a 30-year project, and then I'll apply this advice at that time.
probably would be better to use a bottle of wine.
Oh yeah, that's a good idea.
That's what I was going to say.
Yeah, I just don't drink alcohol, so I couldn't do that. So, it should have been chocolate milk. That's what I do drink. But after 30 years, chocolate milk. Anyway, okay, so we've done that. And now let me talk about the user experience. Le Morte D'Arthur is very unconventional. It is not at all like what you will expect. And therefore it is unrecognizable. People, when they are confronted with something that is beyond the range of their normal experience, they don't know what to think of it. And so the first thing people do is they interpret it in terms of what they already know. For example, the very first movies, what is cinema? I don't know. And so they decided cinema was recorded theater, canned theater, and they treated it like that, which is understandable, but really wrong, because in that, the camera sits where the audience sits and just stays there. And it was D.W. Griffith who came up with the idea of, let's have the camera move around, and we can zoom in on somebody's face and zoom out and see a big crowd. And boy, those were radical ideas back then. But it took a while, and Le Morte D'Arthur, I think, is similar in that it will not be understandable for what it is. People are going to look at it. Visually, it looks like interactive fiction. You see a bunch of text, image, and you get to make some choices and you push buttons. In fact, not even as good as interactive fiction. You don't get to type in anything you want. You just get a few buttons to choose. So most people will say that it's interactive fiction or choose your own adventure or something like that. And that is a very superficial assessment or interpretation of Le Morte D'Arthur based on the most superficial aspects, namely what you see. In terms of what you do and how it processes your actions, it's completely different from anything that's been done before. And so that's been published before. I'm sure that some of you guys, especially Sasha and Chris, are in fact experimenting along these lines and doing some interesting work using similar concepts. But in terms of published final stuff, big stuff, whatever, it is unconventional and will be misunderstood. That's guaranteed. I mean, face it, if it's unconventional, it has to be misunderstood. It's inevitable. My guess is, I think the best way to explain it is, let's suppose we get 1,000 people who start with Le Morte D'Arthur. And of those 1,000 people, my guess is that 900 of them will walk away in the first 5 minutes. The primary reason for this is that most of the people messing around with computers are young people, and young people don't read. Reading, that's hard. Just show me some video. I'm in too much of a hurry. I don't have time to read. And so the reading will chase away a great many of them. Also, gamers will hate it. They may last more than 5 minutes, but they will walk away because they bring expectations that this is a game, and those expectations will be dashed, stomped on, blown up, burned, shattered, because this is not at all a game. It is, most important, it is not fun. Art, entertainment is supposed to be fun. Fun is not at all necessary to art. I mean, seriously, have you ever walked into the Vatican and the main entrance there and you see the Michelangelo statue of Pietà, of Mother Mary holding the body of her son? And you say, wow, that's great. I love it. It's so much fun. Listen to Beethoven's Ninth Symphony. Not many people giggle when hearing that. Reading Shakespeare, Hemingway, those things aren't fun either. They're art, and art doesn't have to be fun. So the gamers they're going to hate it because it's not fun. Another aspect of this is that Le Morte D'Arthur is deliberately confusing, but I'm not throwing, come on, red carps, red fish, what is it in a mystery that they throw in to confuse you?
Red herring.
Red herring, yes. Red trout, red, whatever. There are no red herrings in it, nothing that is meant to deliberately deceive you. Rather, this reflects an old concept I've always pushed that many other people have stated in other ways, and that is the light is defined by the shadow. That is, if you're going to tell people the truth, you also have to show them the falsehood. And in interaction, that means you not only have to give people the opportunity to do the right thing, you must also give them the opportunity to do the wrong thing. And between the right and the wrong, the message gets through. But because there are these opportunities to do the wrong thing, a lot of people are going to feel misled. And they're going to be confused by it. In fact, my guess is, and these are just wild guesses based on very little feedback I've received, the average user who out of the 900 people, or out of the 1,000 people, 900 will run away in the first 5 or 10 minutes. The next 100 will go through a good ways, but I'd guess about 50 of them will abandon it after a few hours and just say, this just, I can't make any sense out of this. It's jumping all over the place, and I don't see a clear purpose or clear direction. Basically because it's here's the metaphor, it's drawing an image by bringing in spot after spot after spot. And it's only after you've seen a whole bunch of these spots that you can start to see the whole picture. And a lot of people will be confused by that process. So I'm guessing really only about 50 people will make it through to the end. And that will take them between 10 and 20 hours of time, because there's a lot of text in there. It's at least the size of a novel. And so you'll have to do a lot of reading. And again, that would chase away a lot of people. But so out of the 50 people who reach the end, my guess is that about half of them will decide that, I just don't understand what happened here. I just don't get it. And they'll give up and walk away, which means about 24 people will come out of it saying, I didn't really get it, but there's something in there. I can sense there's a purpose, a meaning to it. I'm going to go back and try, and I got a feeling for what it might be. I'm going to go back and try again. And they'll go back and go through it a second time, which will take about half as long, because, they can skim through the stuff they've already read. And on the second pass, they'll still fail, but they'll start getting the idea. At the end of the second pass, they'll say, I think I know what this is about. I think, and they'll go back and do it a third time, and on the third time they'll nail it. That's my estimate of the likely response. It's just a guess, and it would be I'd be very interested in hearing your feedback if you have the time to expend on it. It's true there's a steep learning curve. Most good games are designed to have a very neat, clean learning curve where you learn one little detail at a time and just get a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better, a nice, clean learning curve. The learning curve for the Morte D'Arthur is because you have to understand the artistic concept, the message, and that message is not simple, and you're not going to pick it up like, Oh yeah, of course, everybody knows that. The meaning of life is blah, 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 blah. You're just gonna have to go through the whole thing and do the yeses and nos and blacks and whites and figure it out from your experience interacting with it. The overall reception to it, I think, is going to be very negative. That is, my guess is that as it becomes more, I'm going to be opening it up to the world slowly. Oh, and one other thing, one of the beautiful things about publishing on the web is there's no end to it. Throughout most of my career, there was a certain point where you delivered a diskette to a publisher and that was it. You were done. It was frozen. You couldn't fix it if there were any problems. But with web publishing, you can always go back and add something else. And so what I'm releasing right now is the alpha version. And my guess is after I get a bunch of feedback, I'll do a beta version. And then there will be a gamma version and a delta version and an epsilon version. And I'm never going to be able to sleep at night because there'll always, I could probably do that dialogue a little differently. And so I'll go through the letters of the Greek alphabet, but I guarantee I will never reach the Omega version because that would imply that it's perfect, and it will never be. So the overall reception, though, will be very negative. Those 900 people, especially the gamers, they're going to have a lot of nasty things to say about Morte D'Arthur. And it's, Crawford blows it again. This is the end of Crawford's career. More junk from Crawford, whatever. There'll be a lot of that, and I'm not overly concerned about that. But there will be a few people, somebody who publishes something on their blog, I finally got Morte D'Arthur. God damn it, this thing is powerful. And they'll talk about why they appreciate it. And so we'll get all this negative commentary on the internet and just a little bit of positive commentary. But as years go by, the negative commentary will sort of drift into obsolescence or whatever, and will be forgotten, just as just like the hot games of today will be forgotten in 10 years. But over the course of time, these positive ones will attract a few more people. I think I'll go play that, and they'll try it out. And slowly we'll get more and more positive stuff building up. And I think that long after I'm dead, decades from now, people will finally be saying, that was a classic. That really was a major change in the way these things are designed. And it triggered a bunch of really good stuff. Hint, hint, Chris, hint, hint, Sasha, hint, hint, everyone. So I'm very much hoping that it will inspire people like you to do other good stuff. The bad news is it doesn't present a simple pattern that you can copy to do good stuff. If some wealthy person who saw this thing and was terribly impressed by it, came back to me and said, wow, I really love it. Here's $1 million, do something else. I think I'd have to give him his money back because I don't know. I mean, I don't see an obvious way to do a sequel or a follow-up or anything like that, because this is art and it comes from the heart. It's not done from a pattern or a template or anything like that. It's just something that came out of my heart, and maybe there's nothing left in my heart. I don't know. But this is not something that can be planned and organized and pulled off. My hope, though, is that some of you guys will we'll have something that you've always been wanting to do. And you might, by playing the Morte D'Arthur, you might be able to see, I could take my idea, and if I change around the way you did the Morte D'Arthur and maybe I can merge it and do something really good. So anyway, let's see. So that's oh God. And we go ahead, Sasha. Oh, turn on your audio.
Thank you. Okay, so you mentioned you predict that not everyone is going to finish the game. Do you have anything in place to gather statistics on how many people will finish it out of the people that play it?
No, I don't. That's better write it down or I'll forget. Usage statistics. Good idea.
Analytics.
Yeah.
Oh, and maybe you guys might happen to want access to it. Let me
Yeah.
let me bring it up here. Basically, I tucked it away into the deepest, darkest corner of there we are, and of my website, so it would not be easily found. But it's I had to change that. There. Yes. That will get you to the introductory page that will tell you, here's what it is, here's what you have to do, push these buttons, whatever. And from there, you can jump on to the continuing. Once you get into it, basically, the Morte D'Arthur is one web page. You're not jumping from page to page. Once you start the story world, it's just a single web page. And by the way, the web page is like 1.2 megabytes. And so it might take a minute to fully load. But once it's in there, just, bookmark that page. And then you can come back to that bookmark because it remembers where you were. It gives you a little cookie that remembers where you were so you can keep replaying. And in fact, if you want to, you can restart, go back to the beginning. But you don't have to sit there for 10 or 20 hours. I don't dare quit now. So anyway, let me just make sure. Let me respond to some of these. You died once, can you do it again? What do you mean by that, Craig?
It was more just a snarky remark, like about the
okay.
sequels. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, I see. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Peewig. Okay, I will look up Peewig or Piewig or.
It's called Matomo now, so because we can't have nice things on the internet that actually make sense word-wise.
Oh, okay. Well, if you use long words, I'll bet there's no I bet nobody has ever taken the Francisterion name or the Dactylodictus or Bathycopian. Just look up some long English words. Okay. Oh boy, Patrick, I'm gonna have to save that. Go back and figure it out. Let's see. Okay. Other questions, comments, whatever.
I'm kind of curious how easily you'd be able to port this over to Sweepweave.
Oh,
So am I.
No, I didn't. Basically, I took the Wumpus design and then stripped away all the stuff I didn't need. This thing is ridiculously simple in coding terms. I think in fact, let me look it up right now. The JavaScript code is all of, let's see, here we go. JavaScript code is 313 lines of code. That's it.
I was just thinking somebody could probably write a script to convert from your story world format to Sasha's.
Very likely, very likely. Mine is definitely a very small subset of the full thing. So it's it's much simpler.
You should try to get Jason Rower to play this, and maybe he'll want to do a thing or incorporate a system into his sort of MMO that he's been doing, where there are some story elements incorporated.
That's a good idea. I'll
Yeah,
send the
I
link.
want to see what he said. I want to know what he says about it. I'd be really curious.
Oh, ooh. Yes, Nas, did I miss you? Or you're just typing it in now, or?
Yeah, I was, but you already answered my question. I was wondering if you designed like a pause button or something, since it's like a 10-hour experience, but you answered that already. Besides that, for me, as probably like one of the youngest people here who do not like reading that much, I was wondering if you're planning to maybe incorporate text-to-speech applications. For example, it can read it to me while I'm doing something else, and then maybe with voice input, I can also make my decision so that I can be doing simultaneously many things at the same time. Because that would help a lot of people like me to, you know, drag themselves to the end. It's done.
It's an interesting thought. I'm sure I could do the text to. Ooh, though, the text to speech has to be specific to each character, though. We can't have them all speaking in the same voice.
There are a lot of free voices, but the acting, definitely, it's something else. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be hard because, yeah, there are a lot of emotionally intense statements made.
Also for, I guess, for non-native speakers like me, like when I read, understanding the emotions, they're not that natural to me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I don't know. I'm pretty sure there's a some kind of solution for this somewhere in the internet. I believe in
I know.
AI.
I know that at least, I mean, some 20 years ago, I saw a system where you could put emotional markers onto text. And that was a long time ago, so I'm sure it's much better shape nowadays. But boy, re-scripting that's going to be a job. Although I'll bet that's been converted over to an AI system where it can, yeah. Interesting points.
Let me throw an idea out there. It's one of the more humble ones. So in general, when you have like an interactive fiction, going back to Zork, whatever, the space might be contiguous, like King's Quest style. It might be a disjointed graph, but in general, you're interacting with like a big state graph that loops in on itself. And kind of a big difference here is that it's a directional acyclic graph. So you're always inexorably moving. Every time you do something, it's always inexorably taking you closer to fate, you know? So maybe since there is a lot of content there, if you had a little bit of UI feedback about what time of year it is, and you started the game in spring and you ended it in winter, it would be very thematically appropriate. and then approximately every encounter is about 1 day, give or take, but not necessarily, right? But like it could be, and it would fit. If you add more encounters, then you might have to slice that and dice that some way. But you don't have to go to that granularity. I just think the seasons kind of pacing it a little bit would be good for the macro.
That was an idea that was the fish in my drawing, in my representation. That is, yes, at one point I wanted to do that, but then I realized it kept interfering with the way I was writing the encounters. Right now, this here we go. I'm going to invent 2 new terms for you: aspatiality and atemporality. And so where the A means not or without. That is, aspatiality, I've always felt is a very important element of drama. My way of saying it is, there is no map of the Star Trek universe, because the map would only hinder the drama. And in fact, no movies, you almost never know where people actually are. It doesn't matter. And they simply disappear from one stage and reappear at another. And I'm also going to say that should also apply temporally. That is, we really shouldn't have to worry too much about temporality. And in fact, there are an awful lot of things in movies where the picky guy inside me says, wait a minute. He was there a while ago, just in the last scene, and now all of a sudden he's way over here and he doesn't look any older or whatever. I think that's just an important part of drama. In drama, you throw out an awful lot of reality in order to emphasize the drama. And so
I get that, but what if you just did like act 2 begins, act 3 begins, act 4 begins, and that way you get the same punctuation of like, oh, I'm making, like, something's happening here, right?
yeah,
Because what's great about this is nobody goes in circles, right? You like, something is going to happen. You just have to like, and I think with the art, the feedback from seeing the art makes it more, I don't want to say necessarily fun, right? But pleasurable, I think, is what we want. And I think color coding some of the words, and like I was thinking about doing this procedurally with a modular system, but also like okay, the bigger thought that I have is that there are a handful of things that I've played that have artistic notes. Maybe they don't have multiple artistic notes that really resonate in a symphony, but that achieve some things in games, right? So like Jason Rower's work would probably be some of his stuff would be among that. And this reminded me a lot of Planescape Torment. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That was from the D&D franchise, and it had 100,000 word script, right? And they really tried to do art in the dialogue trees. And there's a lot of surprising, because it's a weird setting where it's like the different kinds of afterlives. There's a lot of surprising stuff they could write in there. Chris Avalon was the main guy who did that. And in that game, if you lean into having a lot of wisdom points, it'll unlock extra dialogue options, which allow you to kind of get the lateral solution, you get the third option, right? And that's how they did it. And I think what you're kind of trying to do is you're trying to make the actual player stack up those wisdom points themselves through inference, right? And the sort of didactic of that. And so that's very cool. And then in the process, you can figure out how to sort of position for that global variable, because you do have, I don't want to spoil it too much, but I think I can say that much. You have a global variable that's more important than the other global variables, and which is equivalent to wisdom in the way they designed Planescape. And then all the other D&D stuff that they did was more gamey, but Planescape was actually kind of trying to do, like, the moving around the space wasn't that important in Planescape. So it might be interesting for you to go check that game out, because it is really quite a classic. And what was I going to derive from that? Well, yeah, just wanted to make that point about the wisdom tracking, and I think that's quite interesting. And like, I'm really happy that there are young people here. Pleased to see that. So I'm like pushing 40 now. But I got my late 30s.
Wait a minute. 40
I'm-
and you don't think you're young? Hey, I'm 72.
I know, but yeah, no, it's true. But I'm not guaranteed to live to 72. I could get cancer or some shit. So you made it, And anyway, but the point is, I've been working in tech. Oh my God. I was just watching Silicon Valley and just vibing with like how like run over this guy is, because that's how I feel as an entrepreneur, and having worked in the corporate side, not loving that either. I've been through all this shit. So I'm really excited about open source stuff, procedural content, and I do believe that Chris has distilled, and I was giving him all these ideas about meshing it up, and kind of rejected that, which is healthy, because it's a very pure thing. And then other people can go mesh it up how they please. And I think we're going to start seeing that. So like personally, I've been playing a lot with Midjourney lately. So I see it's possible to generate lots of images and fill out this content format. I would probably try to write encounters with like a 200 word max limit as like my editorial guideline. That's how I would do it. And maybe play with having more things. And I'd like to slowly try reintroducing. So for instance, if you have modular nouns and adjectives, and then you have modular verbs and adverbs, not too much modularity on the verbs, because then you get into an explosion. So maybe you stick with 3, but then you could maybe throw in some adverbs to those. Well, now we're kind of getting back to Storytron, right? So I can see that there's a lot of room to incrementally add in complexity like Storytron had, without it being this wholesale thing, and having it meshed in this kind of interactive fiction plus art format is good. And I think a lot of people could make, especially once there's some modules for those things. So like, for instance, where do you get the nouns and verbs? Well, what if you have some object generator and it generates townspeople, and let's say they're fairly generic at first, and we'll sauce it up. So like Dwarf Fortress, I'd love to look at the source code for this. I imagine he has it public, Tarn Adams, but he has a very rich mythos generator where you can just like spin up a bunch of dwarves, and it's like, oh well, this guy's grandfather died from a curse, and this guy was his father was a hero, and he died fighting the ogres, whatever, right? And it can come up with some pretty good background content. So that kind of procedural text generation has been done quite vividly. And Tarn's really like a kindred soul to you, Chris. I mean, I don't know if you've ever talked to him, but this guy's just been, it's a 20-year project now. It's, he started in like 2002. It's a totally procedurally generated world, dwarf simulation, but there's like a lot of storytelling layered into it. I think I've ranted long enough, but I'm really happy to see there's other people here interested in being a part of the same movement. And then like financially, one last thing I'll say is that if I was offered $1 million about this, they're like, yeah, Chris didn't want it. said to email you. I say, okay, great. Let's get some developers. I have this idea for a product called ZK Story World, which allows you to take game logic or take the story world logic. You can have a multiplayer story world, and it does a zero knowledge proof of what the global state is, and it publishes that to a layer 2 of Ethereum called Starknet. That's what I've been developing on lately, because I'm trying to do proofs for Bitcoin, so you can do Bitcoin state, and that's like financial. But there are a lot of people in this sector have been doing NFT games. A lot of VC money's gone into it. It's a little bit like the social games boom 10 years ago, or technically that was 12 years ago, which produced a lot of shit, obviously. And so VC money rushing in is actually kind of a counter indicator. But it also means that there are business models out there, and that we can eventually grow into multiplayer story worlds where I'm in a love triangle, I'm in a conspiracy, and then I don't know what the other players are going to do. And that introduces this other dimension. And I think that's going to be great. So, okay,
we've got Naz and Craig, but before that, there are 2 last things I want to make sure that you know. One, I'll mention my system has a randomizer in it that will play through the thing, making random choices of buttons, and I build up statistics on it. And basically, just by playing randomly, about 1 in 10, about 10% of the time, you can reach the satisfying result. Second point is that our seminar next month is for you guys to give me feedback on the Morte D'Arthur. So you have 1 month to play with it or walk away from it, whatever. But I'll be very much interested in hearing your feedback in our next one. So Naz, I don't understand your question. Can you expand on that?
So as a person, as a designer, I always try to approach to whatever I'm creating from a user's point of view. And since you put so much effort into this, I feel obligated to ask you. Earlier you mentioned that the learnings, okay, I cannot say this, I'm so sorry, I'm sick a little bit. Learnings, oh my God, the word won't come. The learning curve will be like this, this, and this.
Yeah.
So I feel like something like this, also coming from a gaming point of view, is not going to help a lot of people, as you already said, stay in the experience. And my concern is that when you made this art, and the art no longer belongs to you once you publish it, why won't you help your users stay so that they can hopefully understand, like at least go more further into it than you originally planned to? So what I'm trying to ask, I guess, like why aren't you trying to make this a little bit more user-friendly for a lot of people who might not have the willpower to see it through?
Okay, I have two reactions. I'm not sure they properly address your point. The first is that games need that smooth learning curve because they give instant feedback. That is, as you're going up the curve, oh, you blew it, you're dead. That doesn't happen with the Morte D'Arthur. You go all the way through it, no matter what. You can make all sorts of terrible decisions, and you only get the feedback at the very end. Now, that introduces its own difficulties, but the smooth learning curve goes hand in hand with the instant feedback. And so with Le Morte D'Arthur, since the feedback only comes at the very end, it doesn't really help much at the very beginning to be trying to help them because they have to see the whole thing. Again, it's a long step puzzle. You got to see the whole picture before you can do it. Now, I try to make it easier by early on, it's primarily expository and you get very few decisions. And the decisions you make are not as important, not as crucial as later on. So that's the closest I come to what you're describing. The second point is an awful lot of art operates under the adage RTFM. Have any of you ever heard that acronym? That's from the bad old days, back in the early 80s. RTFM was the answer to all complaints about lack of user friendliness. RTFM means read the fucking manual. And that was the standard response when people said, yeah, but I can't figure out how to do this. And you just RTFM. Now, of course, we've come a long ways from that. But let me point out that there's no user manual at all for most art. I mean, when you read Shakespeare, he can be hard because a lot of those words are hard to understand. They're obsolete. And And in fact, there have been attempts to modernize Shakespearean English, and most people agree those are really terrible. So this is a difficult problem with art. An awful lot of art just doesn't explain itself. And that, of course, with art, we do have lots of commentary that helps you understand, and we don't have that with Morte D'Arthur. I don't really know how to answer your point.
Okay. I want to refer back to the first question's answer. You mentioned that you're helping the users in the first, I don't know, first how many questions. Why not think about introducing, even if it's a fake or meaningless, not so essential feedback loop, so that they can retain playing or like interacting with it.
There might
It's your baby. Like make sure that people like, you know, stay with it.
There might be a way to do that. It just occurred to me. A very important character, in fact, probably the single most important character, is Merlin. And Merlin confronts Arthur over and over again. For example, the first time he really interacts with Arthur, he just looks at Arthur and says, "What makes you worthy?" And then there follows a dialogue about that. Now, I could throw in some more Merlin dialogues where he helps Arthur. Yeah, there is something I could do. I'll develop that concept. That is, Merlin right now challenges Arthur. His role is to challenge Arthur's beliefs about the meaning of life. I could also give him some dialogues to make it a little clearer. Thanks for the idea. I like that. I might be able to make that work. So, and of
Well,
course,
I have a quick
I
question
will
regarding
insist
what
that
you've done
is
in the last like
my
couple of
idea.
months.
So, I'm sorry.
I have a question about what you've done in the last couple of months, because before I would click a thing, I would see the global variable change you had loaded into it. I was able to get a lot of inference from that, but it was very mechanical. Now you've hidden that, which is probably appropriate, and you have these text responses baked in based on what you choose, and you get some feedback from that.
Yeah.
And so I need to do it. I need to give it a full replay in order to appreciate the depth of craft in that piece, because it is like getting feedback, I think, has been the whole problem since you started working on this in the 90s, but maybe but with Storytron, it was like, and I got to a point where I was going to sell a serious games company a sort of training sim on how to become an ISO certifier, if you can think of something more corporate. And it was with Storytron. So I actually was able to hobble together something, and they were interested to work with me in that regard. I don't know what exactly. I think I got paid, and then I didn't take the job. I wanted to be in South America instead of Ottawa, which maybe, I don't know if it was a good choice, but it's a lot warmer. So yeah, like we had the faces, we had the iconic faces with Storytron. Here we have the images, and the art budget is kind of what we're wrestling with. And I think maybe if we take your artist's templates, like for Guinevere, for example, and then you do some GAN transfers on some other photos, for example, of different facial expressions. So this is like the idea with the models. You could ask this of your Patreon kinglets, right? And if you need to, we could do different expressions. And mix, and in addition to the text, you could have the reaction face. And I think that could do a lot. That could go a long way. It's just how economical is it to generate? Maybe now it's more economical than ever.
Okay, Sasha, I'm sorry, Craig, then Sasha.
Oh, thank you. So I took a little detour into tabletop role-playing games, and mostly not necessarily the traditional ones like D&D and all that other kind of stuff where you get all those wonderful stats, but more into the storytelling type games. And I'm wondering if the right audience for this may be the storytelling folks. And the reason for that is because they tend to be a lot less focused on statistics and all that other kind of stuff and trying to, figure out how to get a +1 sword so that they can kill the baddies, because they're more interested in the whole experience of the entire story. And my thought is that because this is a storytelling world and because they're interacting with the story, that may be the place where you could find the people that are more accepting of, having an outcome, because and all the stuff that I've played, the outcome isn't necessarily the best outcome. It's an outcome. It's a satisfying outcome, and that you've managed to make it through whatever traps and what other sort of things the setting allowed you to do. And I'm thinking that maybe the right approach for this is to get a whole bunch of people that are already immersed in the idea of not necessarily having a successful outcome, like you connected all 100 treasures or some other stupid thing like that. Not that that's bad, but so that you have something where it's where they had the capability of saying, okay, I managed to get this ending. It's not necessarily the greatest ending. I'll go and play it again and see if I can get a more satisfactory ending out of that. I think that may be the audience that we may want to approach with this early on and say, hey, these, because your traditional gamers, I don't think are necessarily going to glom onto this because they're going to be trying to min-max this and figure out how to get, oh, Arthur's got a really great ending. It's fantastic, that sort of thing.
I agree the gamers are not going to like it, but that does raise a point I'll put to all of you as you play this. Consider and ask yourself, what group of people do you think would make the best audience for this thing? Because it is so unconventional. We know gamers won't like it, but who will? Something for you to think about. Sasha, you've had your hand raised for a long time.
Yeah. A feature to consider, you may have already considered it, but another feature to consider for the game would be a transcript. Because it looks like I just pressed a couple of buttons. It looks like you can only see one encounter at a time. You can't see what came before.
Yeah.
And since understanding this work is going to involve integrating everything, integrating the whole playthrough into understanding the work, it might make sense to let the user open up a transcript of the entire story so far in order to go back and review what's gone before and think about that. That would potentially help. I don't know. I haven't played the game yet, so I don't know if it would be appropriate for sure, but it's a feature you might want to consider.
My immediate reaction to that is the problem arising from the fact that the decision you make, there are only 3 buttons at most, but is closely tied to the long text. So we would need some sort of a few phrases that summarize the text to associate with the response. I could probably do that in the title, or I could add a new field, but without that other data, I don't know. Let me think about that.
Yeah. So the way Sweepweave does it, Sweepweave does have a transcript, and the way Sweepweave does it is the transcript just has all of the text of the encounter and then the text of the option that the player picked. It doesn't have the text of the options that they could have picked, just the one that they did pick. And it has a basically the command prompt arrow in front of the option that the player picked to designate this is the player's action. And it has all of that data that the player can look back at to in case they forget something, because that's something I notice. I played Chris Conley's game, Revolution Diabolique, which is a great game. Everyone should go play it. But one of the things I really wanted in that was a transcript, because I wanted to go back and look at what had happened before and compare it and think about that and use that to make the current decisions. So it's
Well,
something to consider.
The idea is sound, certainly. In fact, I, in a sense, anticipated that by about 40 some odd years, in that, God, in the mid 1970s, before computer games of any sort, I bought the war game that was called War in the East, which was the ultimate war game, and it had 4 huge maps that had to be on a big table, and it had literally thousands of counters. And the idea was, I bought this game, it was very expensive, and set up a table all by, locked the cat out of the room, and started playing through this huge game. And I kept a record, but I did it in a story format. And so the story readings might be week of June 13th, 1943. The German offensive against Kursk has begun, is now in full swing, and the German 30th Panzer Division made huge breakthrough south of Prokhorovka, but a Russian counterattack, blah, 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 blah. Basically, I told the story of the game, and I think I still have that somewhere. But in effect, I transformed a game into a story. And I've long felt that it's a good idea to take a player's game and produce the story from it and give it to the player. This is your story. But I've always worried about that, and there are always some difficulties making it work. But I'm going to look into that idea and claim it as my own. So thank you. Chris.
Yeah, I guess you were talking about, like the difficulty of giving feedback like along the way during the story world. And I think like one method that I've seen used, especially like in choice script games, which are often a similar structure of mostly linear with some trees along the way, is that they will have some like optional encounters you could add along the way, which are only selected if certain variables are especially high or especially low, and that can start giving some foreshadowing of what the player might be heading towards if they don't change the way they make choices.
Okay. Patrick asks a question here that I think Sasha is best suited to answer. Do you see the question that Patrick typed in?
I do. I haven't programmed anything in choice scripts, so I'll let Chris Conley talk about the choice script. But so Sweepweave is designed where it's very similar. It's kind of mechanically, it's between Storytron and the encounter system that Chris is using. So it has the pages or the encounters where it describes what happens, and then the player makes a choice, and then a character can react to what the player did, and then it goes to the next encounter. So I think that's still basically what Chris is doing with Morte D'Arthur. I'm using that same format with Sweepweave, but with Sweepweave, it displays it to the player as though it tries to make it look like a Twine game or like a game made in ink or a more traditional interactive fiction system, where from the player's perspective, it's just something happens, they make a choice, more stuff happens, they make another choice. And because it combines the reaction that the character picks with the text of the next encounter. And so they're very similar. Sweepweave has a scripting system inspired by Storytron, where you can use a tree basically of operators to decide which encounters occur and which reactions occur. So you could say you take the average of how much this character likes you, how much they hate you, and how much their best friend likes you, and then use that to say this encounter occurs rather than this other encounter, things like that. So they're very similar. Sweepweave is more complicated, and I have a lot of work to do on Sweepweave before it gets to the point where we can actually publish something like Chris is doing. Chris is ahead of us in this regard. We're still I still have a lot of work to do on it. But yeah, they're similar. Sweepweave publishes a standalone HTML page. I'm imagining people uploading that to like ish.io or different sites. So it's similar in terms of the interface. Sweepweave is kind of, I guess what I think Patrick was talking about, kind of, it's similar to the encounter system, but with some features from Storytron added in to try and get some of the power there. But I'm trying to still keep it as simple as possible, and it's still based on the paradigm of not a cyclical graph, but an acyclical graph. So my impression so far is Morte D'Arthur has this progression from beginning to end, this overall arc and this forward momentum to it. And Sweepweave is very much designed to make a similar kind of story world where the playthrough goes, it has the progression that a novel would have, but it's interactive where you're changing global variables with the things you're doing.
Chris, do you want to answer that now, or do you want to wait until next month after you've seen the Morte D'Arthur working?
Yeah, I guess I can give like an idea, like as far as I understand your story world, even though I haven't really played it yet. I think that like behind the scenes, your encounter system and Sasha's Sweepweave are fairly similar. Like even though they present the information, it looking differently, like behind the scenes, it's similar. It's just Sweepweave allows more complex calculations and a lot more variables. It can be tracked depending on the story world. And choice script is pretty different, like both in terms of the presentation to the user. It's just every page is a big block of text, and then you have a series of radio buttons along the bottom, and you pick one of those to decide what action you want to take. And like it's tracking typically lots of variables, like dozens of floating point and probably hundreds of Boolean flags over the course of a typical choice script game. But it also, the way that you write for it is very different. It's a lot more, I mean, it's basically a standard imperative programming language. I think the closest is like one of the old basic programming languages. So it's all full of labels and go-tos and go-subs. And writing an encounter in either Chris's or Sasha's system, it's a lot more self-contained, and you're specifically writing the text for the encounter and the calculations for what happens when you pick each of the options. And you don't have the same level of flow control, like you can execute kind of code in any arbitrary order in choice script. You don't really have that same sort of freedom in either of the encounter systems. It's more kind of forces you to use their paradigm for the most part.
Yeah, to use a techie term, choice script is Turing complete, and sweep weave and spear shake, Chris's encounter system, are not Turing complete. They're very focused.
Okay. Well, we've gone way over schedule here, but the discussion has been useful, and I've got a lot of notes here that I've got to pursue. So remember, next month is your chance to shoot back. So bring the rotten eggs, tomatoes, and the spitballs. I will see you guys then.
Thank you for letting us go over time, Chris.
Okay.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. See you next month.
Okay.